Hello, hello, and welcome. My name is Malin, like Melinda, but no duh, and I am a non-binary Seattle resident here to join the book discussion not only with book reviews, but I want to examine the craft behind books. I would love to talk about what makes a good story, from characterization, plot development, punctuation, grammar, and syntax. So if any of that is of any interest to you, please stick around. Today, what I wanted to discuss with you all is the first chapter of Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. So I'm sure for anybody who is watching this video knows at least something about this book, so I don't want to do a regular review of this book. There are other creators out here who are better at that than I am, who have already discussed a myriad of points about this. So what I wanted to do in particular is pretend that I am a beta reader for this book and offer some insight as to what I might have changed or recommended to Rebecca if she'd asked for my critique before publishing. Specifically, I want to go over the first chapter of this book. So while I didn't come away liking this book as a whole, I did think it had a lot of potential, and it fell short in ways that I think could have been easily repaired had it been given a little more time in the oven to bake. So with that, I want to begin by just going through a thorough breakdown of the chapter scene by scene and simply offer my natural feedback, criticisms, neutral and positive comments about the first chapter. Not only what I was thinking when I first read the book, but when I was going through this a second and third time reading the first chapter, to kind of understand what went wrong with the creation of this book and what could have been done better, personally, from my own opinion. The book opens with our main character, her name is Violet Sorrengail, on her way to her mother's office before this big upcoming event. Violet is going to Dragon School. She's being enrolled in Dragon College. All the 20-year-olds, there's like 1,000 of them or something like that, they're all trying to become dragon writers. The catch is that she has no interest in doing this. She wants to be a scribe, a writer, not a writer. She also has a physical disability that is unnamed in the book, though it is rumored to have been based off Rebecca Yarros' own personal disability of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It could be a hindrance to Violet's survival in the upcoming year. So that is the established conflict and our character of the story going forward. Now, some questions that I ended up having as a reader that were left unanswered by the end of the book were, why does Violet want to be a scribe in the first place? We know that she's established to be a history nerd, especially in the next chapter. She starts reciting off a whole bunch of pieces of history about the country that she lives in. She's always citing like the codex to people. She's like, oh, according to section whatever, apex, no. So she's very well studied. So she's established as a little bit of a nerd, but she doesn't really talk about why she wants to be a scribe in particular, because you can be a dragon writer and be a nerd. She doesn't talk about a passion of preserving the history of Navarre, the history of maybe her family, her sister who's a dragon writer, her brother who died in battle as a dragon writer, her mother who is a commanding officer of a large chunk of the dragon writer army. And so she doesn't talk about that she wants to preserve the history that her dad taught her, or to preserve his memory because he is now passed. So that was something that actually did not really get answered by the end of the book, because Violet does quickly change her mind and want to be a dragon writer instead of a history writer later on. So I did think that that was something that I felt kind of let down about. That's a character goal. She really wants to be a scribe, but I don't know why, and I never found out why. Continuing on in this scene, we get to meet Violet's mother. She is, quote, tough as talons, according to the synopsis of the book. Her mom is a legendary dragon rider. She's general of the army, or at least a large part of it. She has no patience for anybody who is or doesn't want to be a dragon rider. So this is one of the early conflicts of the book. Violet does not want to be like her mom. She wants to be like her dad, which her mother so lovingly points out is dead and likely doesn't want for anything anymore. So that's very cold. I do think this is a very solid character introduction of her mother. She takes no shit. She's very strong. She has to be as a general in this dragon army. So she has certain expectations of her kids. So to me, it would make sense that the mom would want her kids to be dragon riders, so it adds some extra conflict between Violet and her mom as characters. But a question that ended up coming up to my mind while reading this is why Violet's mom has this distaste for scribes. She points out that they're useless, that they're sort of weak, and Violet is clear to narrate the fact that her mom does have an expression of kind of like this sorrowful love on her face when she's talking about her late father. So where does this vehement disgust for scribes come from? If the mom is so upset over the dad dying, wouldn't she want to therefore protect the last child she has that has yet to go into this dangerous thing? Wouldn't she want to protect the last remaining piece of that husband that she loved locked away in a library? And this is an idea that came to my mind thinking about this. Rather than introducing Violet's character as wanting to be a scribe and not wanting to be a dragon rider because she feels like she'll die within that process, I personally would have preferred if Violet wanted to join the Honorable Dragon Riders, but her mother was against it due to her physical disability, her supposed and perceived weakness. And so Violet has to sneak into dragon riding school, basically do the parapet on her own. And it could add in when Mira, her sister, comes to give her the armor to survive dragon school, that could build a relationship between Violet and Mira further, thus entering in more conflict with the mom. So I think that would have been a little bit of a stronger idea, and it gives Violet more agency in the story, because right now the plot is happening to her. She is being put into dragon school. She is being pulled along by the plot rather than she is pulling the plot along with her, if that makes sense. And so I think Violet having more agency to activate the plot would have personally been more enjoyable for me as a reader, especially given how ambitious and driven Violet is introduced as being by the author of this book. She is constantly saying she is not going to die. She will survive this no matter what. You know, she's going to kick ass regardless of what happens to her. She is very strong. She is perseverant. She's a persistent person. And so I think her being fearful and not wanting to die and being like, I'm so weak, I can't ride the dragons, is so contradictory to the character that she is on page. So I think that's just more of a personal preference for me. Fundamentally, with Violet being dragged into and forced into dragon riding school, it sets off the story. It's a little weak, it's less compelling, and it's more, I think it would be more compelling, yeah, if she had joined dragon school herself or like snuck her way into doing it. The scene does continue. Violet's sister eventually does join the fray. She runs into the office stating that Violet is definitely going to die if she's forced to ride the dragons because, quote, look at her. So Violet is immediately feeling pitiful and frustrated, and it does make sense with her character. She doesn't want to be perceived as weak. Even if she personally feels that way, having other people point it out to you does not always feel great. But I think this would have been such a fantastic chance for Violet to defy her family right here. She could openly state that she will become a dragon rider to show her mom that she is as honorable as her sister Mira and her dead brother. It could flesh out the mom's character even more because it can give a reason as to why she has a softness and a love for her husband. Maybe she wants to protect the weak, and to her, Violet is weak, and so she's trying to protect her, although she's being a little bit of a jerk about it while doing it. Like, you have to be a scribe. I'll die before I let you sit on a dragon, even though I do it right. Like, that would have added a little bit of complexity to their characters. It would have given the mom another reason to have loved a scribe too, rather than detest them because they're weak. She does love scribes, and she wants to protect them. She wants to protect Violet by extension. And it would, again, allow Violet agency in the fact that she could defy her mother. She would speak up against her and say, no, I'm doing this whether you want it or not. And then in the next scene where the sisters have a moment to each other, Mira could be like, I think you're really awesome for doing that. Here's some really cool shit and some advice for dragon school. Like, I think that would have solidified what Rebecca Yarros was already going for when she started this story. So like I said, eventually the sisters do have a moment to themselves, have a little chat. Mira gives Violet a dragon-scaled corset to wear at all times for protection in case people try to assassinate her in her sleep, because that's a thing that happens at Dragon Rider School, I guess. She tells her to wear it at all times because Xaden Ryerson, a person whose father was killed by Violet's mother, and then his father had killed Brennan beforehand, some shit like that. Revenge plot is introduced, and then Mira gives Violet a pair of like special cleats and says, trust me. It's very cryptic. She doesn't really go into details. She's just like, put on these shoes because you need to put on these shoes. And the last piece of advice that Mira gives to Violet is that she should go and get laid, but only by the first years and not any of the upperclassmen, because rules, and for some reason this is plot relevant. So my critique is not necessarily on the topic of conversation, right? It's how the flow of the conversation goes from your life is in danger, always keep up your guard, but remember to have sex because you could die. And I'm probably because I'm asexual, I just don't identify with the I gotta get laid before I die mentality. So maybe that's where my disconnect is coming from. There's just this heavy dose of tonal dissonance happening in this book where it's trying to be a very serious fantasy, but it reads like a high school romance. There just happen to be dragons within the story as well. And coupled with the really annoying style of Violet talks like this in her head where every word is separated by a period, and that drives me bananas. So I personally, that I just was not a fan of it. My coworkers were, my friends are, they were like, well, it's like how her thoughts sound in her head. And I'm like, okay, that's totally fair. I didn't like it. So that would be my feedback for her there. Continuing on, the chapter is about halfway through or so. And a side note here, the chapter is like 30 pages long. It's a pretty thick first chapter. It goes really fast, but not a whole lot happens. It really is just a handful of scenes. And I don't really have a positive or a negative to it. It's just something that I noticed. It's a very long first chapter. Anyway, Violet and Mira walk up to what's called a parapet. It's like a sheer cliff that's like drop off on both sides. It's super deadly. And the first challenge to even get into the dragon school, rather than taking the SAT, is they have to walk across this deadly cliff, and they probably will die. And this is where the shoes from earlier come into play. So that it was really good, foreshadowing, whatever. That was well done. Now, before the challenge begins, we are introduced to a really small cast of characters, some of whom will be reoccurring, and the only two that really matter right now is Rhiannon and Xaden Ryerson. Rhiannon ends up becoming a pretty good friend of Violet's. She does seem nice. She's really the only one who's outwardly friendly to Violet when she first shows up at the parapet. It really is, the idea of introducing Rhiannon here is more to flesh out Violet as a character here, since this is the first establishing chapter. And so it's clear that Violet is a very caring person. She would not want to harm others, and she thus offers up one of her shoes to Rhiannon so that she can also make it across the parapet and survive. With Xaden's character introduction, his is not something that I was particularly fond of, mostly because he's your stereotypical tall, dark, and handsome love interest. He has onyx eyes with gold flecks in them, dark black hair, and olive bronze skin, like the usual trope. And a trope is a trope for a reason. They are used. I'm just not a personal fan of this trope. He even has shadow powers. That's just to me, it's just an overused cliche, and I'm just like, okay, I saw that coming, and it's just not really super creative. So to me, it just kind of fell flat, though I can totally see the merit and the enjoyment in a character such as this. Xaden is immediately hostile to Violet, which does make sense. Her family killed his during the rebellion, but she does retort that her brother died because of his family, so it is a cycle of violence theme that's being introduced here. My gripe with this just comes from the heavy-handedness of the cliche of Xaden's character in general, mixed with the fact that he really doesn't get much character development through the rest of the story. He tends to stay the brooding, dark, you need to listen to what I say, we need to stay away from each other, but let's fuck type character. That, to me, that just falls flat and is not very interesting to me. At this point, we do get a small info dump about the world and the Dragon College at large and how it kind of works. This info dump is not necessarily a bad thing. Exposition can work, and in this part of the book, it does tend to work for her. I don't think it was overdone. In the next chapter, I do think it is. She's trying not to have a panic attack on the parapet, and she's just reciting a textbook verbatim about stuff that's completely irrelevant to the plot as a whole. It's just world building stuff, and I'm like, this isn't necessary. She could quote something else, facts about the dragons, because maybe she's obsessed with the dragons, and that's why she wants to be a dragon rider. She happens to know everything about the dragons before she even gets to Dragon College, like she's girl boss Hiccup. I think that would have been really fun. My only problem with this little bit of exposition here is the glaring hole that's in the rules and the way that the Dragon College sort of functions, and it really just does not make sense to me. And I don't know that if it's answered in the second book. I don't want to have to read the second book to find out. But my question is, why on earth? So Xaden Ryerson, like I said, he's a rebel, right? And he's at the Dragon College. He's a wing leader and everything. He's pretty high ranking in the school. He's got a decent amount of power, and he's got one of the coolest dragons in general, with magic powers he would not have otherwise. Why on earth would the Navarian dragon army allow ex-rebels to have dragons in the first place? Why would they not send the rebels and the children of the rebels to the infantry, the other branch of the army, where the death toll is almost 100% according to Violet's expositions? It makes little to no sense that the rebels would be basically given access to the nuclear codes of the country they hate. So spoiler alert for the end of the book, if you don't remember, what did they think was going to happen when the rebels stole the dragons and fucked off at the end of the book? That just doesn't quite make sense. For the army, that doesn't make sense. I think it's cool that the rebels get to ride dragons, and I think that's a cool concept. I just think the author kind of missed the mark on that. What I think would have worked a little bit better is if the rebels were maybe forced to be assistants to the dragon riders, put into more fatal, dangerous situations, but getting to bond with the dragons on another level, being the dragon caretakers or something like that, being the stable keepers. They could have developed a natural sense of trust between the dragons and the rebels, because the dragons are established to be incredibly sentient and smart. They overrule the army when it comes to Violet later on having 2 dragons, which is a first. Otherwise, the Navarre army just looks like fools for allowing the rebels to get such powerful access, and they end up going off to fight in another rebellion with Violet's like not dead brother. And even if we needed an excuse for Violet to meet Xaden as the love interest in the story, he could have been the keeper to her dragon, or the keeper to Sgaeyl, the blue dragon that he has. He could have been her keeper, which still would have made an excuse for Violet and Xaden to meet, because her dragon has made it to his. So there were still a myriad of ways that she could have come in contact for Xaden, for that plot to happen. It just, to me, it does not make sense, especially for an army and a country to make a foolish decision like allowing the rebels to have the dragons. But lastly, the chapter ends pretty simply. One of the minor named characters that Violet was introduced to a little bit ago starts the ascent of the parapet. Violet hears a scream interrupting her thoughts and sees that the boy has slipped and fallen to his death only seconds into the challenge. He had a cute little introduction, so it's super sad he died, but it's more for like shock value of like, hey, this is how legitimate this threat is. And then Xaden Ryerson looks at her with a wicked curving smile, warning her that she should fear the parapet more than him. My only critique to that is just the cliche wicked curving smile of the hot love interest, but other than that, the chapter ends just fine. It establishes the conflicts, it sets up the next danger of what Violet has to face, and it gives a pretty decent introduction to who she is as a character, though it is contradictory with her goals and aspirations when it comes to scribe versus writer. Overall, those are my thoughts. The funny thing is when I first read this book, I really didn't like it. I kind of made fun of it. I had a lot of like notes throughout the book that said like, ooh, cringe, not like, why? But doing this objective beta read critique actually made me appreciate this book a little bit more than I had. I actually enjoyed getting a deep dive into Violet's character a little bit more. I really do think that this book had so much more potential and would have been a lot better had the author been given the opportunity to work on this a little bit longer. I do think it's a shame that the publishing company is kind of just like churning out books rapid fire, like fast fashion. I think if this just had a few more months, a few more beta readers, and a few more critical eyes on it, it would have been a fantastic fantasy romance, Divergent meets Dragon, Hunger Games, fun shit that we miss reading from our middle and high school days. If you enjoyed watching this video, I do thank you for staying this long and listening to me rant and rave about the first chapter of a book I read months ago. If you're interested in hearing more about critiques of the craft of stories, please stick around with this channel. I am hoping to put more of this out and build my own future publishing company and a community of independent authors and writers who not only create books, but really good books for people to read. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for watching, and have a great rest of your days. Bye.